wanted to ask you about Big Black
Okay.
to start with. Just the uh, no press. I wrote down that there was no press. We didn't do a lot of press for that.
Well, we it's kind of it's an awkward distinction that we make, which is that we made then and that I still make. Is that I'm happy to talk to whoever wants to talk to me, but I don't want to badger anybody about it. Like I'm uncomfortable having somebody soliciting press interest in the band. Um, so we've never had a publicist or a press agent or anything like that. And we also don't give out free. This is completely true of Shellac, the band I'm in now, but was also true somewhat of the other bands that I've been in. We don't try to solicit interest in the band. So we don't send out free copies of the record. We don't invite journalists to shows for free and that sort of thing. Journalists are welcome to take an interest in the band, but we're not lobbying.
So they need to seek you out? Is that the word?
Basically.
Right.
Yeah. I'm not interested in trying to
Promote yourself.
Yeah, not interested in being promoted or promoting myself or promoting the band. There's no shortage of bands that are clamoring for attention, and they aggressively want people to get involved in their publicity. And there are enough of those bands that we don't need to be another one, you know.
It's sort of like that. I wrote that way. I find it really interesting that the Rapeman vinyl was not allowed to be pressed with the name.
Oh, we didn't actually have any trouble.
I thought
There was one printer that didn't want to print the covers in England, but that was all.
Oh, so you actually did some.
It was just a trivial 2-minute problem. Just call another printer.
Oh, okay.
You know.
I guess somebody blew that up. Because I was under the impression that at one point you just weren't allowed to do any more press of it because of that.
No.
So, no.
The records have never been out of print.
Okay. What drew you to record? Are you self-taught? Did you teach yourself?
Yeah, my interest in recording has always been an outgrowth of my being a music fan. As parallel interests, I've been in bands, been a fan of bands, and wanted to make recordings of my own band and my friends' bands, and then that became an avocation after a while of doing it as a sort of a dabbling interest. It became a very serious interest of mine, and then it eventually became my profession.
How long did it take to become your profession?
Well, I first started making recordings in 1978, 78. Yeah, for my own band, my friends. And then I moved to Chicago in 1980, carried on doing that, recording my own bands, my friends' bands, and I gradually became of more use to them in the studio. And I didn't start charging money for it until middle 80s, and I didn't start depending on it for my livelihood until about 1987, 88, somewhere in there.
I don't know why I put this in. Do you think that most musicians hear when you're recording them, do they actually hear what you're doing, or do you think that they're just playing and then they kind of let you take it over? Do you think a lot of them depend on you? I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
In some instances, the band is sort of entrusting me with not fucking up their record, and I appreciate that, and I'm flattered by that trust. My obligation, as I see it, is to try to avoid creating problems and solve existing problems within the band. And I don't necessarily mean compositional problems, because I don't really think that's any of my business, but more the technical problems of, this is the band, this is the way we perform, this is what we do. Can we make a recording of that that's representative of us,
right,
without,
depending too much on your opinion?
Yeah, exactly. And also without having to jump through great logistical hoops. Like, can I make it easy on them? Can I make it easy on them? Can I make it
it's more natural
transparent or
something?
something?
To be the way that they need to be too, right?
Yes, but it's also a matter of configuring things in the studio in a physical sense and in a practical sense and in a sort of a methodology that doesn't cause any great interruptions in their thought process or their decision making or their interaction within the band. So there's a lot involved, but the end result is always to try to exert very little influence on the outcome other than removing barriers and obstacles. That's my interest in it anyway.
So for you, I know that as a producer, you don't really want to be, I guess, labeled as a producer, but
I don't really care. I don't really care that much.
Okay,
It's,
but it is a distinction. I mean, people
Yes.
have, there is a distinction.
I
Between
think
the
there
two
is a
roles,
distinction,
right?
and I think that if there is a line between a producer and an engineer, I'm clearly on the engineer side of that
Right,
line.
right.
But I don't really get that bothered
But-
by being called a producer.
Right, but I'm just gonna say, like what you were just saying. If someone comes in the studio and they're not sure what they want to do,
They should ought to go home and decide.
Right, so you would rather just them like go figure it out and then come back when they're ready. Like,
Yeah, I mean, sometimes being in the studio is part of the process of deciding what you want to
Yeah.
do, and I understand and
Is
I
it-
can accept that. But most of the time, I'm charged with making a record for a very specific and generally quite small amount of money. And so the amount of soul searching that you can do
Yeah.
in a budget, within a budget, is quite limited. So if a band is not prepared to make a record and they start making the record, they have to be brave enough to stop if they realize they're not ready. And if they're not brave enough, then they have to be brave enough to come with the extra dough to cover their ass when it's all over. You know, if you got to do it again, then doing it again is going to be more expensive than getting it right the first time. Yeah. And either way, it requires a commitment. Either the commitment of more money or the commitment of more time before you go into the studio in order to be prepared.
Yeah, you need to have that mental state when you get there. Ready and
Well, and it's also just physical and practical preparedness. The band needs to know the material. The instruments need to be in good working order. The equipment needs to be all there and ready to go. It needs to be all working properly. There needs to be a plan of some sort. The plan can be a very loose plan, but there needs to be a plan.
Do most people know what kind of gear they want to work with when they come in, or
In terms of the recording gear, they generally just make the assumption that the studio will be
that they
fine,
have it?
would be good. But in terms of playing equipment like guitars and drums and amplifiers and instruments, I would expect the band to have all of that sorted out before they got there. And if it was an awkward situation where there was someone traveling a great distance and they couldn't bring their equipment with them, I would expect them to be somewhat flexible about what they would deign to use, you know?
Yeah. I mean, what are you gonna do if you can't rent it? I'm so like I was drawn to this conference because of the whole DIY kind of
Right.
vibe about it. That's what I love. And so how hard is it for you to maintain that when the media is so against a lot of your opinions? Like
I could care less. The only people whose opinions matter are those people who are in the room with me that have paid me,
Right.
have hired me to make their record.
Right.
Those people's opinions are the only thing that matter.
Sure.
Everybody, like what the outside world thinks about the session is less than trivial.
So it doesn't even matter. Like you just are always in that state. Like you always keep that with you, right? Just that whole.
It's a state of existence.
I think
And I don't, it's not that I have to adopt the posture of not caring what the outside world thinks. It's that I know with absolute rock solid certainty that the only opinions that matter are those of the band in the room, you know?
It's true. 'Cause, no,
I mean, tomorrow I'll get to go on and work on another record. But the record that I do with this band today, they're going to carry with them to their graves. And it's their responsibility and it's their creative output, their expression, their life's work. I have to take my role seriously. I have to be willing and I have to be eager to let them be the boss. That's my position, you know. And in that same context, if somebody peeks in through the window and says, well, you know, a lot of other people are doing this, maybe you should consider doing that as well, that person isn't actually in the band. That person isn't actually part of the session. We are free and I think encouraged to ignore that person. So,
well, they have to come in with that whole completeness. You know what I mean? They need to know that when they come in there, they're prepared and they're ready and they know what they want. If somebody's all of a sudden trying to influence them. What's the point? Like,
Well,
at that point?
the uncertainty is the biggest like buzzkill. Like if you're standing there trying to make a decision and you can't make that decision, you're making no progress, you know? And progress is the name of the game when you're, generally speaking, I'm working under a budget, I'm working under time constraints and money constraints. So the least productive time is time spent creating a problem that is raising doubt that doesn't need to be there, or second guessing a decision that's already been made and time that's already been spent. Sorry, I keep wobbling my head. My neck is stiff.
Yeah, everybody's wiped. How large is the crew at Electrical Audio?
We have a full-time staff of 6, and at the moment we have an intern, but we don't normally have interns.
Have you ever recorded something that you're not completely happy with?
Yes.
Okay, so what happens in that situation?
You bum out about it. That's all you can do.
Is there a way that you can stop it from being released? How do you work on it?
No, it's none of my business.
So,
Like, I've worked on records where I felt like I was the weak link in the chain, and all you can do in that situation is do your best and plug away at it. You know, most of the bands that I work with don't have the luxury of doing it again. And so you do your best. You try to stop the leaks. You try to make everything work as best you can. But every engineer will occasionally let his client down and let himself down.
definitely.
It happens. There's no way to avoid it.
You can't please everybody.
Well, no, I'm just saying there are times when if there's just a difference of opinion within the band, like what should we be doing, and this person says this and this person says that, and come to a consensus that you do this. Satisfying that consensus is good enough for me. But there are times when I feel like I've been asked to do something that I should have been able to do. I should have been able to solve this problem. I should have been able to make this thing happen, and it doesn't happen. And I feel a responsibility, and I feel bad about that. That it happens rarely, and the more experience I get, the less it happens. And the broader my vocabulary of techniques is, then the less likely it is to happen. And sometimes you can recognize a train wreck coming and avert it in one way or another. But it does happen. And I'd say of the 1,000 some odd records that I've made over the last 20 years, there are probably 2 or 3 that will always gnaw at me as be like the record that I didn't do a good job on, you know?
I don't know if you can ignore this question if you want, but how often is it that people throw your name around to say like, oh, Steve Albini works in your record?
I don't really know because I'm not in a position to hear that. You know, they wouldn't do that to my face.
No, that's exactly true.
I do know that the notion that me being involved in a record will somehow make it more successful commercially is a mistaken notion. I've worked on a lot of records that didn't sell haven't sold a lick, you know. So I think anyone maintaining that as a conceit about how they're going to go about promoting the record is barking up the wrong tree. But I can't honestly tell you how often it happens because like I said, people wouldn't say to me, I'm really excited about Steve Albini having recorded this record, you know. But by the same token, I never go into a record store and say, hey, do you have any records that were recorded by this guy?
Oh, yeah.
You know, I would go into the record store and say, hey, do you have the new Lightning Bolt album? Or do you have the new, you know, whatever? Like, and
But that's you. Like, I think a lot of people do seek out your work.
I don't think so. I
I
think
do.
people
I
like what
don't
they like,
think
and I think people like what they like, and they
I-
might try to find rationalizations for
Yeah,
it
you're
later.
right.
You know,
I can see
my point being that I think anytime you suppose that the rest of the world thinks differently than you, and you try to accommodate this imaginary mental framework, you're going to be guessing on top of a guess. Whereas if you just think, well, this is a rational position, I think that way, let's assume the rest of the world thinks that way, at least you're operating from a known position, which is that at least one person on earth thinks that way, me. You know, let's assume that the rest of the world is at least as intelligent as me and will think in shades of that color. I don't think people give a shit who worked on their records, on the records they buy. I don't think they care at all.
Well-
They might, as a bit of trivia, they might know about it.
But they just like what they like.
Yeah, it might further inform their opinion of something.
That's true.
But I don't think that anyone would, hearing a record they didn't like, discover that I had worked on it, and then suddenly like it. I don't think that would happen.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, do you think you have a signature sound now?
I don't.
You probably.
But that's, I understand why someone might say that. Like someone who's only heard a few records that I've worked on, and that those records have some commonalities in their structure and in their presentation. I can totally understand someone making that, taking that position. I've heard all 1,500 or so records that I've done, and I know how different they are one to the next. And I also know how different a job I had to do one to the next. So I can't have that position. I can't have that opinion because I know too much. I know too much of my own discography, right?
You've been immersed in it for so many years.
So when someone says that I have a signature sound, that sounds like nonsense to me. But if someone goes into his record collection and he's got, say, a Jesus Lizard record, a Nirvana record, and a PJ Harvey record, and those are the only records that I've done that they're familiar with at all, and I could perfectly understand why they would say, oh, he's got like a sound. I could perfectly understand that. I can't agree with it, but I can understand it. I do think that there is a standard production aesthetic at play in the world.
Everybody has a style.
Not for me specifically, because I consider the bands that I work with to be the producers of their records, but in the world at large.
I don't think you can get away from that. Like everybody is individual, right? So if you're gonna work with someone, you're gonna actually put something in it that's you, regardless if you think it's there.
Yes, although I think it's a mark of professionalism that you keep your tastes at bay when you're working for somebody else. Like, you don't want somebody exerting their own emotional energy on your record. You don't want your gynecologist getting turned on when you're in the stirrups. You know, you want that person to be professional. You want him to be doing his job. You know, and I think that's a perfectly apt parallel. I also think that in the world at large, there is a standard production paradigm now, and it's being dictated by a defensive position which has been enabled by Pro Tools and other such things. And I think that makes most records sound similar. And records that I work on are not going to fit that paradigm. So I could understand someone saying, this doesn't sound like all of these other records, therefore it is of a type, you know? And if that type is a sort of a general utilitarian perspective or naturalistic presentation, then I suppose you could say with some validity that is a sound, but I would debate it. I would debate that.
So you work with analogue,
entirely.
No digital, like I heard you say before.
I don't have any. I'm not dogmatic about it. Like I'm happy to use a digital delay or make a DAT copy for somebody, make a CD copy for somebody, something like that.
Yeah.
But tape recording and like multi-track recording and mixing of records, I think is best suited to analog recording techniques. I've never encountered anything that I couldn't do that I wanted to do that was limited by the technology. And I know that there are things that I can do that digital recording people can't do, and that suits me fine, you know. I don't see any limitation to working in the analog domain, and I see a lot of drawbacks to working in the digital realm. So.
What about, I just want to ask you something. The Jesus Lizard, when you're recording, somebody was telling me, and it's true, that there was a pipe that went through the floor and you recorded. You put the mic underneath the pipe and stuff the security control. You say that.
Sounds like bullshit to me.
It's bullshit.
I don't know exactly what that's referring to,
Yeah,
but it sounded like a doo-doo to me.
Yeah, that's kind of a joke. I want to ask you about Mimi Parker because I love her voice so much. I think just listening.
This has no bearing on the conversation, but it's a family name, a pet name from within her family, and their pronunciation is Mimi.
Oh, is it Mimi?
Mimi Parker. Or Mim.
I didn't know. Just working with her, just be like, it feels to me must be so amazing just because her voice seems so pure.
Yeah.
Just,
her and Alan both have pure magic voices. Utterly pure, absolutely magic.
So perfect.
Yeah. It's effortless. From a technical perspective, it's absolutely effortless. I never have to worry about it. Never have to worry about them not getting it, or I never have to worry about, I don't have to try to do anything magic to save a take.
That's what I was wondering about. It's like I had a feeling that it would just be so natural and so easy. Just so,
Some people have it, some people don't. Those two have it.
Definitely. Do you want to talk about your mic collection a little bit?
Not really.
No.
I have a lot of microphones. That's because they're all different, and you can use some in some ways that you can't use others. That's all. It's not a big point of pride for me. It's just a utilitarian thing. Over time, you end up with a lot of microphones because you have to cover all your bases.
That's it, really.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hit the head.
Will you sign your waiver?
No.
No?
No. You're welcome to do whatever you want with this, but I'm not inclined to get it in the legal obligation.
I'm going to do your review stuff. Yeah, I guess it is weird.
Exactly.
Covering my eyes, but yeah, sure.